The United States has directly attacked Iran in an act of war. Donald Trump has escalated the war on Iran that started on the 13th of June when Israel launched a surprise attack on Iran with the support of the US government. Trump had given Israel's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, a green light. And now Trump has gone even further, and on the night of the 21st of June, Trump carried out direct airstrikes on Iran, bombing 3 different nuclear sites. And Trump said that those 3 sites were Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan in the center of Iran. Immediately after he ordered these attacks on Iran, Trump gave a speech at the White House. He was surrounded by Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who were all warmongers. And Trump boasted of destroying these 3 major Iranian sites.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise.
Also, after bombing Iran, Trump posted a JPEG of a U.S. flag on his website, Truth Social, gloating over this act of war. So this is a major escalation. This is the first time that the U.S. military has directly bombed Iran in Iranian territory, which is a major violation of international law. It's a violation of the UN Charter. It's a violation of Iran's sovereignty. And it's an aggressive act of war. And there will be consequences. This is by no means the end of this conflict. Iran made it very clear that it will retaliate and hit U.S. military targets, and it has many options. There are at least 40,000 U.S. troops in West Asia, in the so-called Middle East, and there are dozens of U.S. military bases and other military installations all across the region. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, the U.S. has bases or other military installations in the following countries: Bahrain, Egypt, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the United Arab Emirates, as well as the nearby countries of Djibouti, Greece, and Turkey. And in particular, Qatar hosts the U.S. military Central Command Forward Headquarters, and Bahrain hosts the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet. So these are all potential targets for Iranian retaliation. And believe me, Tehran is going to respond. It's inevitable. And Trump knows this. Tehran has to respond because if not, it will look weak and it will only inspire further U.S. attacks and further Israeli attacks. Iran has to establish a deterrence because at this point, the Iranian military recognizes very clearly that the goal of the US and Israel is regime change. This is not about Iran's nuclear program. In fact, the US Director of National Intelligence, who oversees the US spy agencies, Tulsi Gabbard, admitted in testimony for the US Senate in March, just 3 months ago, that Iran is not building nuclear weapons. Iran does not have nukes. Listen here.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003.
Now, this is obviously a very inconvenient fact for Trump, which is now waging war on Iran. So on the day that Trump attacked Iran, that morning, he pressured Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, to go out and issue a statement on Twitter saying that actually, I was wrong in my testimony. The media supposedly was taking it out of context, which is completely absurd. She said very clearly, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. But she claimed under Trump's pressure that actually Iran could soon have a nuclear weapon. This shows how she completely sold out. She abandoned any so-called principles that if she ever even had them. And Tulsi Gabbard helped Donald Trump to sell this illegal war of aggression based on a lie. I discussed that in another video, which I will link to in the description below, in which I showed how Trump is recycling the exact same propaganda and disinformation used by the George W. Bush administration in the lead up to the illegal U.S. invasion of Iraq. Now, back in 2003, the Bush administration falsely claimed that Iraq supposedly had weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and they used that as an excuse to destroy Iraq to carry out regime change. Today, Trump is doing exactly the same thing. U.S. spy agencies admit that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, but in the speech that Trump gave at the White House after bombing Iran, he claimed that the goal is to destroy Iran's nuclear program, and he referred to Iran as a so-called nuclear threat.
Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror.
Now, the irony of all of this is that we know that before the U.S. and Israel started this war on Iran on the 13th of June, Iran was not developing nuclear weapons. But now that the U.S. and Israel are directly attacking Iran, it makes it significantly more likely that Iran will actually develop nuclear weapons. There are so many historical parallels to what happened in Iraq. In 1981, Israel bombed Iraq's nuclear facilities with the support of the U.S., and the response of the Iraqi government was to invest significantly more money and resources in nuclear technology, in research and development. So the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iraq only made the possibility of war more likely. And then in 1990 and 1991, the U.S. waged its first war on Iraq, the Gulf War. And then George W. Bush in 2002 delivered his famous Axis of Evil speech, in which he claimed that Iraq, Iran, and North Korea were part of a so-called Axis of Evil.
The Iranian people's hope for freedom. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. By seeking weapons of mass destruction, these regimes pose a grave and growing danger.
And when he delivered the speech, everyone in the world knew that the U.S. was preparing for war on Iraq, and the U.S. invaded Iraq just over a year later in March 2003. So Iran knew, and North Korea knew, that they were next to be targeted by the U.S. for war. This is why in January 2003, a year after Bush delivered the Axis of Evil speech, North Korea withdrew from the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and North Korea developed nuclear weapons. And that's the reason that today, North Korea, the DPRK, still exists as an independent government. The U.S. has been not able to wage war because it has nuclear weapons. Iran has obviously learned from this history, and it learned from what happened in Libya. In 2003, Libya and its leader Muammar Gaddafi was afraid of a potential U.S. military attack given the U.S. war in Iraq. So Libya decided to resort to diplomacy, and Muammar Gaddafi signed an agreement with the U.S. and the West, and Libya dismantled its nuclear program. And what happened? 8 years later, in 2011, U.S.-led NATO forces waged a regime change war on Libya. They overthrew the Libyan government. They killed the Libyan leader, Muammar Gaddafi. And still today, there is chaos and civil war in much of Libya over a decade later. Iran is not going to allow that to happen. Iran is not going to be the next Libya and the next Iraq. So now that Donald Trump has directly attacked Iran, he has opened Pandora's box. It's become completely obvious to the entire world that this is a U.S. war. Yes, Israel is also involved, but it's the United States that is calling the shots. This is not an Israeli war. It's not Israel that's dragging the U.S. into this war. This is a war being waged by the U.S. empire, just like how the U.S. waged war on Iraq and Libya and Syria and Yemen and Afghanistan, and go back to Vietnam and Korea and Yugoslavia and Panama and Grenada and Nicaragua. The list goes on. The U.S. is at war with Iran, and the Iranian government is going to take the actions necessary to preserve the Iranian state, to prevent regime change. And that means that it's almost certain now that Iran is actually going to pursue nuclear weapons. The US has made it pretty much inevitable that Iran will develop nuclear weapons. And this means that other countries in the region and potentially around the world will also pursue nuclear weapons, including, let's say, countries like Turkey. Erdogan is going to be watching very closely. Turkey is a very large, important country like Iran. And if Iran develops nuclear weapons, Turkey might as well. Potentially even Egypt, potentially Saudi Arabia. So this could lead to more nuclear proliferation. And I have to stress that Donald Trump bears a lot of responsibility for this because in 2018, Trump unilaterally withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, which had been signed back in 2015, which was known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. This was a deal that was not only signed by the US and Iran, but by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council of the UN, which includes the US, France, the UK, China, and Russia, plus 1, Germany, plus the European Union. And then the United Nations approved this deal. It was written into international law through a UN Security Council resolution. Trump sabotaged all of that agreement. He reimposed sanctions on Iran illegally and has made it much more likely that Iran will actually pursue nuclear weapons. And this is why it's completely absurd that in the speech that Trump delivered in the White House on the 21st of June after attacking Iran, he threatened Iran and said, "You must make peace." He ridiculously claimed that Iran is the so-called bully of the Middle East, when actually it's the US and Israel that are constantly at war with all of these countries. The US has been at war in West Asia for decades. And yet Trump says he supposedly wants peace. But it's actually Trump who sabotaged the previous peace deal that the US brokered with Iran in 2015 under the Barack Obama administration. And it's Trump who's waging this war. Listen to Trump's outrageous hypocrisy here.
Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill.
This is absurd on so many levels because Iran was previously participating in so-called peace talks with the Trump administration when it was attacked by the US and Israel in this surprise war of aggression on the 13th of June. After Trump returned to office for his second term in January, Iran participated in 5 rounds of talks with US officials as part of negotiations for a new nuclear deal, or at least Iran thought that the US wanted to sign a new deal. But in reality, the Trump administration was using these talks as cover as Trump was planning with Netanyahu to carry out this war of aggression against Iran. So why would Iran go back to the negotiating table, especially after the US and Israel have literally killed some of the Iranian negotiators? The people who were in peace talks, what they thought were peace talks, with the US just a few weeks ago, they're dead now. And in fact, Trump himself boasted of killing these Iranian officials. Just after Israel started this war of aggression on Iran with Trump's green light on the 13th of June, Trump posted on his website Truth Social, and he boasted that Iranian officials, quote, didn't know what was about to happen. They are all dead now, and it will only get worse, end quote. How can Iran negotiate with this? I mean, this is just terror tactics. You cannot negotiate with someone who is killing your negotiators and waging war on you and planning surprise attacks when you think you're negotiating peace talks. And in this post on Truth Social, Trump proudly referred to what the US and Israel were doing in Iran as, quote, slaughter end quote. And then he said that, quote, the next already planned attacks will be even more brutal, end quote. So Trump, in an Orwellian fashion, claims that now that he's attacked Iran and bombed Iran's nuclear sites, he wants peace. He's trying to convince the world that war is peace, but he actually opened Pandora's box. Iran has to respond because Iran recognizes that the goal of the US is not just destroying Iran's nuclear program. It is regime change. What Washington wants is to impose a puppet in Tehran, like the US did in 1953 when the CIA backed a coup that overthrew Iran's democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, and installed the Shah, the king, a brutal dictator who governed with the support of the US from 1953 until 1979, when the people of Iran carried out a revolution. And ever since then, the US empire has tried to crush Iran and overturn the Iranian revolution. And now that the US is directly at war with Iran, this is a huge escalation. Iran is going to retaliate. They are going to hit US military targets in the region. And this is not in any way the end of the conflict. And before I conclude here, I want to mention one other detail, which is that on the 20th of June, one day before Trump carried out this attack on Iran, the renowned journalist Seymour Hersh published an article in which he cited US and Israeli sources, and he made it clear that Trump was planning heavy bombing of Iran, and that US officials told him that their goal was to overthrow Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. That is, decapitation of the Iranian leadership for regime change. Again, this is not just about the nuclear program. But there was another important detail in this report by Seymour Hersh that I think says a lot about the priorities of Trump and the US government. Seymour Hersh, again, this is a world-renowned journalist. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the Vietnam War. He's exposed many US crimes, including, the crimes committed by the US at its torture camps in Iraq and these black sites. But in this report on Trump's attack on Iran, Seymour Hersh noted that Trump was waiting for Wall Street to close, and that's why Trump was going to attack Iran on the weekend, and he did attack Iran on the 21st of June, which was a Saturday, because Trump didn't want to cause massive volatility in capital markets. So what we see is a clear example of what Donald Trump actually cares about. When he's launching a war on a foreign country like Iran, he makes sure to do it on a weekend because when the stock market opens on Monday, he wants to make sure that all of his billionaire friends on Wall Street are not mad at him. He wants to make sure he doesn't crash the stock market like he's previously done with his tariff announcement and all of this. So this really shows that for the US government, the interests of Wall Street come above everything else. That is the top priority of the US president, is serving the billionaire capitalist oligarchs on Wall Street. And of course, there are 13 billionaires in the Trump administration, or at least there were until Elon Musk left. Now there are 12. But Trump himself is a billionaire, and these oligarchs are the people who are actually determining what US government policy is. All of these wars of aggression that the US wages around the world constantly against Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, Syria, Vietnam, Korea, Yugoslavia, the list goes on. These wars are waged on behalf of these oligarchs on Wall Street, of these big billionaire capitalists who fund politicians in Washington from both political parties and who are heavily invested in the military-industrial complex. And they're now going to be raking in more and more profits as Trump is waging yet another war in West Asia. And again, I have to stress that this is very, very dangerous because Iran has more than 90 million people. It's significantly larger even than Iraq was. So we are entering a very dangerous moment. And if you want to be informed about what is actually happening in the world with these constant US wars, please follow our work here at Geopolitical Economy Report. I am Ben Norton. I'm the editor-in-chief. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. I will see you all next time.